Let's dig into the story of Rainier Beer, one of the most iconic beers ever brewed in the Pacific Northwest.
He's got the new Rainier Draft Lights!
Hey, Marlene, give me another beer.
Get it yourself, Bob!
From quirky commercials to mountaintop branding, it's a beer that's as much about place as it is about taste. The story begins in 1878 when Andrew Hemrich, a German immigrant and brewmaster, founded the Seattle Brewing and Malting Company. By the early 1900s, it was producing more than any other brewery west of Milwaukee. The flagship was, of course, Rainier Beer, named after, that's right, you guessed it, Mount Rainier, the towering symbol of Washington State. The branding was clear from the start. This was to be the beer of the Pacific Northwest. And by 1915, Rainier was a dominant force in Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. The beer had clear value from the start. It was always clean and consistent, and backed by the booming timber, shipping, and fishing industries. But like all these stories, 5 years later, Prohibition hit. The Seattle Brewing Company had to shut down, and the Rainier name disappeared for a while, but not for good. After Prohibition ended in 1933, Rainier made a roaring comeback.
There's something going on behind me. I'm trying to determine what it is.
But not immediately in Seattle. It was first brewed again by the Rainier Brewing Company in San Francisco, then returned to Seattle in 1935 when the old Georgetown Brewery was revived. That's when Rainier really started to take off. And by the 1950s and 1960s, Rainier was one of the most recognized regional beers in all of America. It was especially popular in Washington, Oregon, Northern California, and even British Columbia, our Canadian neighbors to the north. But what made Rainier really stand out? The ads. The ads, the ads, the ads. It's always about the ads. Starting in the 1970s, Rainier launched some of the most bizarre and memorable beer commercials ever aired. There were the wild Rainiers, beer bottles galloping across the plains like wildlife. Of course, the iconic Rainier Beer motorcycle ad became a local legend. You're going to find yourself doing that all night, by the way. Rainier Beer. They even hired Terry Heckler, the ad man behind Starbucks and ESPN, to steer the brand into weird but brilliant and obviously engaged territory. The ads were surreal, funny, and totally Northwest, and they made Rainier part of the culture then and forever. Rainier became not just a drink but a shared joke. Meanwhile, the brewery itself, of course, became a local landmark sitting right off of I-5, just south of downtown in Seattle. That giant red R sign, everybody knows it on I-5, atop that building became a city icon, glowing above the skyline for decades. If you lived in Seattle in the 80s, 90s, you knew that big R. But like many regional breweries at the time, Rainier hit a wall in the 1980s. This company was swallowed up by the Heilemann Brewing Company in 1977, passed hands a few times, wound up with Stroh's in 1996, and eventually landed with Pabst, and the brewery moved out of Seattle, first to Olympia, and then to California, and eventually to contract brewers in Irwindale. Seattle Brewery closed in 1999, and the iconic Big Red R was taken down. But like any historical icon, not for long. 2013, the R was reinstalled and reinstated, this time restored by a local community-led effort and rededicated as public art. It still lights up the skyline, a tribute to Rainier's place in Seattle history. So, what about this beer today? Rainier is still brewed, of course, now under the Pabst umbrella. It's made in a facility in Irwindale, California, but it's still marketed, of course, as a Pacific Northwest beer, and it's maintained and gained a loyal following of people looking for a budget-friendly beer with character and ties to the region. You can still find it in bars across Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, especially in tall boys and stubby bottles.
The beer!
On a personal note, you guys who are familiar with the channel, or if you're a newcomer, each year our brewery, Treehouse, we travel to the Pacific Northwest. The first time I went out there was in 2017, and I was greeted by that giant R on I-5. It's a very seared moment in my brain, and each time we visit the Pacific Northwest and we fly into Seattle, we do wind up passing that sign in our travels, and we do pick up a 12-pack every time we're out there.
A 6-pack might have been fine last month, but this is 12-pack weather. Think fresh now.
We're no stranger to this beer. That said, tasting it, kind of separate from that influential environment might make me a little more objective about what I'm experiencing, and that's what we're gonna do here today. First thing to comment on, guys, is the appearance of the can. Again, a lot of these macro lagers have a very, very similar design language. Shockingly, they have similar colors. It's usually white, red, and gold. I don't know why that is necessarily. Throw some blue in there and you have the red, white, and blue, but a lot of these cans have similar design languages, cursive fonts, gold accents. They look great. They look beautiful. On the can, there's a little impression of Mount Rainier in the R, which is a nice touch. Beautiful logo. Mountain Fresh. I don't really know what that means, being brewed in Irwindale, California. It also states that it is naturally brewed, which I'm not sure what the alternative to that would be, like unnaturally brewed. I think most beers are naturally brewed. And then the alcohol content looks like it comes in at 4.6%, and it actually looks like this batch was brewed in Fort Collins, Colorado. Yeah, so beautiful can, 4.6% alcohol. Let's dive into the flavor. You guys should know that before these videos, in terms of the flavor and taste of the beer, we obviously do research on the history, but I do I take zero impressions of this beer before the video. I don't know what it's brewed with. I'm not going to try to reverse engineer it. I'm just, in my professional opinion, going to give you broad impressions of what I'm experiencing and then go from there. 16-ounce can, beautiful, beautiful pour. If I'm to be honest, it looks a lot like the Grain Belt pour. Color-wise, the head looks a little more ephemeral. Not making a comparison, but beautiful, beautiful yellow color. It looks like there might be maybe some yeast floaties in suspension. If so, it's very, very, very minor. Could just be a settled beer and not a filtered beer. I'd be surprised if it was, because you do have like very, very fine floaties in the beer. Head does settle into a skim, which is perfectly fine. On the aroma, mild, earthy, noble hops. A little bit of bread crust, a little bit of like wheat character. Probably no wheat in the beer, but that impression of graininess kind of sticks in my nose. Kind of an ephemeral nose. It smells very macro to me, which is hard to articulate, but it has that kind of really clean fermentation profile. Not overly expressive, really, really kind of simple on the nose. Grainy. You can see as I kind of take in the aroma here, that head's kind of entirely dissipated, which is not particularly appealing. The date on this can is December 25th, 2025. If I had to guess, it's about 3 months old. Maybe they do a 6-month Best Buy. I'm getting a little bit of kind of like oxidative, maybe heat exposure character in this beer, a little bit of that cardboard character. That sounds like a really bad descriptor, but it's not. I'm hyper perceptive to these things. And generally speaking, this is a very mildly hopped beer with very little expressive fermentation character. There's a little bit of apple in the flavor profile, but nowhere near approaching the levels that we tasted in something like Grain Belt. If you haven't seen that video, we'll link it down below. If you like this content, hit the subscribe button. But all things considered, a lot of these macro lagers kind of blend into each other. And because this is made by the Pabst Brewing Company, there's probably a lot of processes that go into making Pabst that are also in this beer, and you can kind of taste the crossover a little bit. The general impression that I get is, for me, if I'm drinking a low alcohol lager, I want it to be zippy and crispy, and I want it to be drying on the finish, and I want it to be crisp and enticing that next sip. And there's something on the finish of this beer, a lingering sweetness that kind of builds as it gets a little warmer here, that I really don't love. Remember, I'm splitting hairs here. This is we're splitting hairs in half. And as a macro lager, it's perfectly well made, perfectly crushable. But for me, I want it to be a little bit zippier, tiny bit more hop character, a little bit punchier. All right, guys, the reason we wind up tasting many of these beers on the channel is because you guys comment and tell us that we should. Your feedback is always appreciated. In terms of Rainier, solid beer, love the Pacific Northwest, love the ties to that area. If you enjoy it, drink what you like, no problems here. Thank you for watching. We'll see you guys next time.